Part 2 of today is solving simple trig equations. So this part is without your calculator. What we're looking for in these problems is we are solving for theta. So we're actually looking for the angle. So for all the special angle quizzes that we were doing for our do nows and exit tickets, we were looking for our trig ratio. But this time we're given the trig ratio, we're working backwards to find what angle gave us this trig ratio. So our steps are, the first thing we're going to do is ignore the sign of the answer. So there's two parts of your answer. There's a positive or a negative, and then there's also the answer itself. So our first step is just ignore whether or not it's positive or negative and just look at the root 3 over 2. This is where we use our chart that we have memorized to look at when the sign give us root 3 over 2. So we're looking for our reference angle here. So looking at our chart, we're looking at the sign. Root 3 over 2 is when your reference angle is either 60 degrees or pi over 3. Okay. Then now we use the negative sign. And we're trying to figure out when is sign negative. So this is when we use our all students take classes. We want to know when sign is negative. So sign is not negative here because this is when all of them are positive. This is when sign is positive. So that means it must be in the third and the fourth quadrant because that is when sign will be negative. Now using these two, we can now put them together to get our answers. So let's start with degrees. If you know that it is in the third and fourth quadrant, 60 degrees away from the x-axis in the third quadrant is when we add 180 degrees plus 60. So this one right here is 240 degrees. In the fourth quadrant, now we have 360 minus 60 degrees, which gives you 300 degrees. So here are your 2 degrees. These two angles will give you a sign of negative root 3 over 2. Now if we look at radians, so we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to use pi over 3 instead of 60. So over here, because it's pi over 3, this is 3 pi over 3. So we're going to add pi over 3 to 3 pi over 3. So over here, this is 4 pi over 3. And then over here, this is 2 pi, which is 6 pi over 3. And you want to be 1 pi over 3 away from 6 pi over 3. So that's 5 pi over 3. So those are our two answers in radians. Okay, so let's do number 19. If they're giving us a reciprocal angle, so for example, this cotangent, we're first going to rewrite it as tangent. So it's 1 over root 3. Get rid of the root at the bottom, which gives you root 3 over 3. So again, we have two parts. The first part is using our chart to figure out what the reference angle is. So you want tangent to be root 3 over 3. Let's look at tangent. Root 3 over 3 is when your reference angle is 30 degrees or pi over 6. We want tangent to be positive. So tangent is positive in the first quadrant and the third quadrant. So now putting these two together, in the first quadrant, this is starting at 0. So in degrees, 0 plus 30 is 30 degrees. In this quadrant, we have 180 and we're going in this direction, so we're adding 30. So we have 180 plus 30. Which is 210. So those are our 2 degrees. And now we want to do radians. So radians is pi over 6. So again, this is just 0. So if you add pi over 6 to 0, we have pi over 6. Over here, this is 6 pi over 6, because that's just 1 pi. And so if we add 1 to 6 pi over 6, that gives us 7 pi over 6. So those are two answers in radians. Now for number 20, this is one where if you look at cosine -1, if you go to your chart and you look at cosine, there is no -1 here. So if it is not in your chart, this is when you know it is going to be quadrantal, which means we will be using our unit circle because it's not in your chart. So when it's quadrantal, we're going to look at our trig ratio. We know cosine is x over r. And if we want cosine to be -1 over 1, that means x is -1, r has to be 1 because r is always positive. So we're looking for when is x equal to -1. So if we look at our chart or our unit circle, we want to find the degree and the radian where x is -1. So x is the first number in our coordinate point, and the only one that has a -1 is this one right here. And this one is 180 degrees or pi. So those are your answers. There's only one answer. It's 180 degrees or pi in radians. Okay, so note that for each of our trig functions, there's going to be 2 positive quadrants and 2 negative quadrants. So there should always be 2 answers unless it's quadrantal. So when it's quadrantal, there could be 1 answer, there could be 2 answers, there could be, we don't know. So it really depends on what it's telling us. So because trig functions could have more than 1 answer, this is not a 1-to-1 function.